Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa Amlani from Retail Strategy Group, and I want to thank you for coming to this very intimate chat this afternoon. So I'm going to start off with a story. I come from the world of buying, merchandising, planning, product creation. I spent about 20 years in that space, and within that time, I worked with Ralph Lauren a lot. I was a merchant in my last industry role back in 2014. And just to walk you, and this journey might sound very familiar to you, is every season we would start with planning projections by category, not necessarily by style or silhouette, but by category. We would work with planning. I had about 150 stores by then. And so we would look at, the entire region of Northern Europe, which is, I led the Lauren brand at the time. And it was very interesting to me because we did this so far ahead that we didn't know what was going to happen a year later. Fast forward a little bit, we have sample reviews, we have product reviews, and I'm traveling to Munich, to my showroom, I'm traveling to Paris, I'm in New York here at the Ralph Lauren offices, reviewing samples, fabrics, swatches, artwork and prints. And the moral to this story is fast forward a little bit over a year, we're in the stores, and we see that we've bought into, a year before, green and an all-over print, which we thought would be, the best thing since sliced bread. So we're in the stores, and we see that actually we bought so far ahead that we couldn't see what was happening in that current selling season, which is the customer hated green and they hated prints. So what happens, right? We buy so far ahead, so what we're going to talk about today is something. We're going to talk about, what retailers are experiencing today. And as you can see, we want to be fast. We do. We really, really do. The challenge is that we're stuck in these processes. Archaic ways of working in Excel. I know you guys love Excel so much. And we're at this amazing show. We're learning about all these digital tools and great gadgets and 3D printing and all these things. But we go back to our desk and we go back to this and we're working slow. Can anybody relate? Yes? Oh, good. You speak my language. This is wonderful. So how do we know this? Take the news of today, right? Bed Bath & Beyond, Target last week or the week before, Walmart, even StockX laid off people yesterday. So what we know is that there's a huge impact on full price sales, on gross margin, on seasonal inventory. We are sitting on loads of excess. And if you've ever worked in off-price, which I have back in the day, and that was my heyday, give me the excess. Not the most sustainable thing in our world, but what we did learn that because we bought so far ahead, we were missing forecasts and financial plans because we didn't know what the customer wanted at the time. And because we were so far ahead, and in fact that time between seasons starts to grow where we can't actually react to what the customer wants. So we are buying into that print. We are buying green, which we shouldn't. In fact, the UK doesn't actually like green anyway, just a food for thought. But what we did learn is that we have a challenge within merchandising, planning, and product creation. When we look at that product creation calendar, it is 52 weeks or longer in most cases. If you buy footwear or technical equipment, in some cases you're looking at 90 weeks before you even see a sales sample. And for those of you marketers or anyone working in wholesale, that's a big problem. These are some consequences of being slow to market. The turtle, if you will. Reduce relevance in the marketplace. What we're seeing is customers have so much more choice than they've ever had before. And if you lose relevance in the marketplace and you are Bed Bath & Beyond, and nobody's buying your product because you don't know where your customers are shopping, but you know they're not shopping with you. And footfall is low, online sales are low. You're losing that grasp of who your customer is. Inventory management crisis. I know we've all been there. Raise your hand if you've been there. Anyone have excess inventory right now? Nobody? Oh my gosh. There's a lot of it. And I think that what we are seeing and what I've seen in my past life as a merchant, a planner, even a product developer, is that we are not using visibility into where our inventory is. We don't have time and space to start changing the way we allocate. And we don't have the authority to change things like size packs or size runs. And we're forced to buy a certain way. So we're forced to buy in the way of the turtle. I really love this turtle. Teams are becoming more reactive. So what we heard with what happened in today's news, as well as what happened with Target, they're having a fire sale. The last thing you want to do is be associated with a fire sale because it is going to devalue your brand. I'll give you an example. Not of the fire sale, because obviously we would want to go shopping. We want to be more proactive. So we were working with a client last week, an outerwear client. And they're an outdoor brand, they're fantastic. And despite the supply chain issues that they were experiencing across their own logistics framework, what we found was their innovative third-party textile vendor that they pretty much used for 60% of their outerwear, added more time because of a transit buffer. So during the pandemic, they went from a 100-day lead time for a raw material that was very innovative, and it was a must-have for their customer. It was something they used all the time, so they were committed to buying this innovative textile third-party vendor. And what we saw was, because that vendor added another 100 days, we were looking at a 300-day lead time on a raw material that you're using for 60% of your outerwear assortment. This is across the year, so all seasons. Now, if you think about the trickle effect of what that does to merchants and planners, where they can't plan and forecast, we don't know when the product is going to drop. And if you think about what's happening to materials teams, they become super reactive because what they're doing now is they're thinking, okay, I need to replace this amazing, innovative textile that, we promise our customers and it's in the marketing and all of these things, but they can't find a replacement textile. And because they're reactive, they haven't been able to have time and space or spend time and collaborate with their vendors on their own innovative textile. So what we do know is that fast is possible. And I'll tell you why we know this, and it's not because he's wearing rollerblades, but it's because we've seen it. We know. We all shop at Zara. We know what Shane is capable of. We may not agree with their sustainable practices or how they go to market, but what we do know is that they can go from concept through production all the way to the sales floor and be in the store near you in 30 days or less in some cases. Now, when I saw this, honestly, this blew my mind completely because I'm so used to working in that 52-week timeline, and in some cases more, especially now if I have raw materials that are not coming in for 300 days, I am in panic mode. But rest assured, fast can be done. Now, I'd like to start talking about the calendar. The calendar is what keeps everyone in line. And that's my ops manager over there. I think you might have one as well. And think of this image as MapQuest. Does anybody remember MapQuest? Hands up. Are we all as old as me? Okay, good. That's good. So what my ops manager is doing is he's keeping the calendar in line, he's keeping design on check to hand in those color samples, he's keeping my materials development teams in check to submit artwork. He's also keeping merchandising, planning, go-to-market, marketing, all the folks in line to follow processes that are leading up to critical moments in the calendar. These are some of the players that I've worked with, and I'm sure some of you may be in the room. What this is really showing you is that we work with design, development, merchandising, planning, sales. We work with raw material planners. We work with sourcing, costing, material design and development, if you're lucky, and product line management, sample management, all of these amazing folks in these teams, yet they're stuck in these silos. They're just in these little bubbles, I like to call them. Add in a liaison office or a sourcing office, a satellite office overseas, maybe in China, maybe in India. And then you have your supplier and factory partners. What this is showing you is that in some cases, teams may have clear line of sight into sourcing partners or into factories or your satellite office or your liaison office or your APAC office, whatever we're going to call it. The challenge is that communication is being held hostage, let's call it. The same thing is happening to insights teams. So we're working in these silos and these archaic ways of doing business and going to market. And now suddenly we've brought in insights, customer insights. Imagine product feedback that can feed back to merchants so that they can plan better, feedback to design so we can have data-driven design decisions. The challenge is those insights are also being held hostage, probably by marketing. Sorry for the marketing folks, but that does happen. Today, I'm going to dive into this calendar a little bit. Now, we know who the players are. We know that they're stuck in these silos or bubbles. But why does it take 52 weeks to get to market? This challenge, low visibility across processes, across functions. I'll give you an example before I go any further. Similar client that we worked with out of Portland, and their challenge was that all the functional teams involved in that product creation calendar actually were working in these silos, and they didn't realize that the inputs that they needed to, for example, finalize their color palette or submit lab dips or even artwork or trims, buttons, zippers, they did not see how each functional team was going to play a role in them meeting a deadline or not. So what we did was we went into this organization. I worked with all the functional leads. They were very happy to have somebody listen to their woes, how much they just detested design because they never met the deadline. And what was very interesting to me was that a lot of them were saying the same thing around meeting deadlines, around not having visibility into line finalization until it's too late, or having insight into what other categories were creating. For example, how many zippers they were developing and if they could actually use the same one to reduce some of that time. Then it brought us to the discussion with the same team on how all the teams were working differently. They were working with different digital tools across categories. We had some teams which were going through a digital transformation, which was amazing. It was like they were using all the tools downstairs. But then we had other teams like design and technical design sending tech packs via zip files to factories and hoping that they would open them up, right? We also saw merchandising and planning teams using Excel. I hate bashing on Microsoft. I feel like I do it a lot. I'm sure Bill Gates is going to tweet me one day. And then what that really showed us was that we are creatures of habit because we want to do things the same way. We're stuck. We are stuck, and old habits die hard, don't they? And this is a problem because as we bring groups together in a room, which is what we did as one of our critical next steps, to talk about each of their processes and how they were inputting information that would help the other teams move forward, that they didn't actually know what went into each process. They weren't aligning at critical moments within the calendar to discuss and to talk about what was happening with customer feedback, what was happening in the industry and the market. I have another example that actually came up from the same meeting where we got all these functional leads together. They were telling us about all the gaps that they were facing and process improvements that would make their lives so much better and easier. And what was so interesting is that merchandising, the head of merch, puts up their hand. Oh, by the way, we just expanded our distribution. And design was like, yes, of course, we heard. And it was like with a major wholesale partner. It was actually with REI. So that's a big win, especially they were opening stores. This was amazing. The challenge was merchandising and planning knew about this distribution expansion. So they were putting it into their plans, and marketing knew, which was great. The person that didn't know was the head of sourcing. So the head of sourcing was like, I don't think so. We don't have capacity at factories, so you need to cancel those extra units. And imagine that trickle effect. I love that face you're making right now, because that's exactly the shock that I felt. I'm like, are you kidding me right now? And they were just like, they were mortified because they didn't have a key moment in their critical moment calendar, so a key alignment moment to actually discuss what was happening in the market, any shifts in distribution, and didn't have the opportunity to collaborate. I see this a lot. And from my observations, what we came to realize was that there were quite a few barriers out there. Those calendar moments are one of them, where they weren't actually getting into a room and talking. But those barriers actually fell into these three buckets. Organizational effectiveness, are we working in the best way? Maybe not. Calendar optimization, which we'll go into a little bit, and overdevelopment. Now, overdevelopment, I think I talk about a lot. If you follow me on Twitter, I definitely talk about it a lot. And that's a big challenge today because of what's happening to the planet and how much, as a consumer, how much we're seeing the media reporting, and obviously we all read about what Shane is doing, and even Boohoo and all of these fast fashion brands. And what we're realizing is that it's not just happening at fast fashion brands, it's happening at the biggest brands in the world. These are some of the barriers that we identified. Time wasted on manual tasks. Who wants to automate that Excel spreadsheet right now? I know you do, because yes, exactly. And what I'll tell you is time wasted on manual tasks is actually happening across functional teams, merchandising and planning with Excel, of course. Anything to do with that calendar, when I talked to that client that I was just telling you about, as we went through the processes, in a calendar that hasn't changed for years, we had PD, product development, obviously you know that. We had design, and we also had merchandising come to me because I had one-on-ones with them. They're like, oh, we don't do this. Just remove that from the line item of the calendar. They have never, ever done that before. I was floored. My mind was blown consistently throughout this project, as you can probably imagine. The other thing that we can do when we think about how much time we waste on manual tasks, you actually think of it as an opportunity where we can start automating. We can reduce redundancies, increase efficiencies, and then that takes me to multiple approval across functional teams. How many of you have attended calendar meetings or sample reviews or proto reviews where we are consistently changing decisions that we've made weeks ago? Right? Am I preaching to the choir? I think I am. So this is something that I cannot tell you how many cooks in the kitchen there are, but I can tell you that there are too many, and we need to change the way we work. Redundancies in product creation. I mean, this is a bit of a no-brainer. The challenge here is tied to materials management. And I've worked with a few big brands, as well as in my own world when I was with Ralph Lauren, or even designing. By the way, I did design the bags for FIFA World Cup 2002. If you wanted to look it up, they're fabulous. The materials teams are suffering. They are drowning. I want to advocate for them, because the way that they are looked at as service providers, they're not looked at as collaborators. And the reason being is because we do not give design guardrails. When we don't give design guardrails, design will develop the world. And the challenge with that is we don't have anyone in place to police them. And that's just one example. Because that brings me to wasteful sampling strategies. I'm sure everyone is well aware of the sample, let's call it an apocalypse. I mean, this has been going on since the start of time, since I started in buying, probably in the year 2000 or so. And sampling, you know, we have this, I'm sure you've heard of it. There's a phrase called no sample, no sale. Anyone heard of that? Yes, yes. It's painful. It is painful because we waste so much time and money and resources. We have teams that just manage physical samples, as you probably know. And then if you're a regional merchant or a regional salesperson and you're sitting in APAC and you don't have samples, you're like, well, I can't sell that. I can't sell that to Foot Locker, forget it. Or I can't sell it to, you know, anyway, I could go on and on, I digress. But what I do want to tell you is that we have identified these barriers, and what it is going to help you do is it's going to get you faster to market. So as we break down barriers in the org, once we clarify ownership and accountability across functional teams, so sitting with them, identifying processes in the calendar that we know are redundant, are not working, or people don't even know what the process step is and it's tied to their function. I've seen that a lot as well. What we're doing is we're really blurring the lines between getting the work done and just talking about the work. Providers to partners. Now I have a couple of examples here. So with the team that we just worked with, we shifted the mindset of the cross-functional leads to look at materials design as a partner versus a service provider. And what that meant was they were in the room at key critical moments within that product creation calendar, which they were not in before. Imagine having materials design and development in the room when you're reviewing protos. At this particular brand, they were not doing that. And I will tell you, I've seen that quite a bit at other brands, so it's not a one-off that, you know, outerwear or an outdoor retailer is working this way. I just talked to my friend downstairs from Comar, and she said they are a billion dollar apparel company, and they don't have a materials team. So design is doing the materials. So imagine, if design is managing materials, do you think they have guardrails in place? Maybe not. So I think there's some overdevelopment happening there. So when we switch the mindset from provider to partner, materials is now sitting in the room with design, collaborating with them, and also they're the ones who have that relationship with their material innovation partner. They know what's going on in terms of newness, and they can suggest other things. Factories are a good one as well, and I think I did speak to somebody about that yesterday, that if we change the mindset of our factory vendors to factory partners, what does that mean? In one of the clients that I worked with when I was with Accenture couple of years ago, 3 years ago, what we did was we shifted that mindset so that that factory partner would actually take away the product testing from the teams. They would take away some of the fit from the teams. And I think we heard that with Comar as well earlier today, talking about implementing the Avalon solution. And I'm not a spokesperson for Avalon at all, but I think it's kind of cool that you can actually speak to your factory partners in real time and fit in real time across the ocean. Calendar optimization. So this is a barrier that I definitely want to break. I don't know if you've realized I'm quite passionate about this calendar. And once we start preventing some of these redundancies that are happening and the manual process and the inefficiencies across product creation, what you're going to find is you're going to create more time and space for teams to become strategists versus doers. And when you do that, it enables creativity, it enables innovation, it enables us to go on the shop floor and talk to the customer, because at the end of the day, what you want to do is get folks loving their jobs again. And I will tell you that teams are stressed. You know, we have COVID, we can't fly, our factories are closed. You know, the China Zero phenomena, I call it a phenomenon, but I mean, it's actually happening. I know they're starting to lift it, but that is a scary situation. So how can they think of new ways of working and new partners to talk to if they're stuck in the same ways of working, thinking about, oh, my factory is closed this week. Oh, I don't have time and space to do anything else because I'm being reactive because design hates this zipper that I developed for them. When we start to do that and we create time and space for teams, we can start enabling things like digitization. That's going to get us faster to market. That's the pedal right there. That's going to help us. This calendar optimization is the pedal to the metal. I just thought of that. I thought that was pretty good. Overdevelopment, yes. So overdevelopment is a big barrier. Not only for the materials teams, but also for the designers when we're fitting garments, also for the sampling teams, the merchant teams. We're using physical samples. We are so dependent on physical sampling, whether you are sampling materials, whether it's trims, whether it is an entire garment. We are so used to working a certain way. We're these creatures of habits. But what we want to do is we want to start implementing these guardrails. Once we start to do that, we can think of other ways that teams can work with materials and product and zippers and buttons and all sorts of things. And of course, textiles and color fall into that. Once you establish a library, and that takes work, absolutely, but once it's set up, imagine that teams can physically go into a library and they can touch and feel fabric. They can look at already legally approved zipper pulls and trims. And what they're going to do is they're going to condense that time to market just by doing that. Very simple, right? Imagine if the library was digital. Once it's digital, it can connect with your PLM system. And a lot of PLM systems I know have this. I think we did start to implement that at Club Monaco before I left. And that would have been a game changer for me. Remember when I said that I designed all those FIFA bags back in the year 2000 and 2001? I hand drew my tech packs. Can you imagine? I hand drew them, I scanned them. My factory partner was sitting there waiting for a fax to arrive of a drawing that I literally sat there and used my ruler. It was sad. It was so sad. I spent days in my 20s sitting there in front of Illustrator and obviously a big, huge sketch pad. It was awful. If I had a library where I could literally plug and play, imagine 10 hours working on a design is in real time, 5 minutes. It's incredible. So here are the things that you can do now. Once we go through those barriers, we identify them, we look at our calendar, we start shifting the way we think about our partners, our factory partners, and we develop clear ownership, accountability, roles and responsibilities. As we see the org start to take ownership of, these are the processes that I'm in charge of. I am going to see you at that critical, alignment meeting, and we're going to just make a decision right there and then we're going to stick to it. Can you imagine how much time you're going to save? Creating that time and space for innovation and insights. Now we hear about insights, customer feedback, let's close that loop. But if we don't have time, then we will never, ever see the light of day of those insights teams that are, being held hostage, as I said. And when we start to think about innovation, I was working with a client where they didn't know, they had just implemented a whole innovation team, and they didn't know when innovation started and when it ended. Right away, that tells me you're doing the wrong thing, because innovation should never end. You should always be in R&D mode. You should always be thinking ahead. And that innovation would have helped that textile vendor to either provide something new for the teams or work with materials teams to develop something that was interesting, that was faster to market, that maybe was, closer to home. So they wouldn't have those 300 days of lead time. Definitely follow me on Twitter. I like to get people really mad. And I love to talk about development and process and calendar. And I'd love to throw it back to you guys if there's anyone that has questions. And I'm just going to call out Miguel because I already told you that you need to ask a question today.
I have a question. I just have more feedback. I think you made a really good point, and I think guardrails is one of the biggest things out there. And I think that's guardrails across all teams.
Yeah.
Again, I come from design, so it's not all just design.
Sorry I bashed you earlier.
But it was like those merchandising, it was everywhere. And I think the guardrails are the biggest thing. And
Yeah.
even as we're going into digitalization, with the brands, I'm hearing people saying, oh, well, here's our DXF file, but then design changed it. And I'm like cringy because I was like, you have to set guardrails. You got to understand that, how to learn these new processes,
Yeah.
but also really, how that will benefit you later on. So I think a lot of that is fantastic. And the calendar thing is a challenge, because you also have to understand the model of Shine and Zara, not as heavy of yarn dye, but there's a lot to learn from there.
Yeah.
In my company, we went from 60 weeks down to 40 weeks, so that was still like an accomplishment.
That's great.
I think, yeah, I made a lot of good points.
There was something that I just thought of, which was item number creation. That's also a big problem within that product creation space, because we have materials teams adding an item number to the material, and then design going in and changing the number or expanding on it. And then you have product management teams who are actually in charge of that item, and they're changing it. And then you have PD going in, trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to put on the BOM, right? So there's a lot of things that are redundant, but unless you really start getting into the nooks and crannies of the process steps that are involved in that, 60-week calendar or now, 52-week calendar, you're not going to really have visibility into redundancies and inefficiencies. So that, I would say that is absolutely the first step. Any more questions? Yes.
Hello. Once you set the guardrails, what are people's reactions? Like, do you feel like people are mostly really open to the guardrails because they have always been looking, or are they really resistant? And how do you get them on board?
No, they're like, how dare you? How dare you tell me how to design? And the challenge with that is how I would solve any problem is, let me tell you what it looks like today. And today it looks like you're creating 7,000 zippers this season. That's what you asked me for, 7,000 developments. I will tell you that only 10% were adopted. So that means, look at the waste, the time that it took for us to go back and forth. Imagine having that time back. So when you start flipping the script, I think that's when you can start to get people on board. And start with a few teams to show them the way forward. Because until you start testing, working together, collaborating, I know, I'm trying not to simplify it, but I do think that the first reaction is, how dare you? And the way around that is to really put that transparency of the process and the waste, and even photos of landfills, I don't know. But you want to really get people to understand what their actions, and this is what's happening to the planet, this is what's happening to the time that we're wasting. And when you start adding data to it, I think that's when you'll start to get teams on board. If you say, we wasted 10 hours on this, did you know that? And then, what? So I think that's how you do it. Did you have a question? No? Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much for today. You can find me also here, yes. But you can also find me on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter called The Merchant Life. Please subscribe, read. I like to give lots of tips out there. I've been in your shoes. I've been a product developer. I've been a merchant, a planner, and I see the pain that I went through, and I also realize that a lot of these things are still happening today because we are stuck in this rabbit hole, and we need to get out of it. So thank you for your time.